Hello, welcome to another little techniques video that we're going to do. Been wanting to do this for a little while to talk about the autopilot in the F-18. The reason for doing this is we've had a few questions in the group from mainly IQT trainees in the Hornet about autopilot, and also not just questions but people discovering partway through training that there's various autopilot modes that do things that they didn't know about. The documentation in the DCS manuals, okay, the NATOPS is better, but there's still some kind of not necessarily very intuitive interactions between the Hornet autopilot modes and kind of how they actually work and what you can do with them. This is not going to be a video about the basics of how the autopilot works and what the different modes do. If there's plenty of other videos online or things you can read about that. So without really talking about the autopilot mechanization too much, we're going to dive into the various modes, and we're just going to go through some of the kind of ways that they interact and the details of what they do that can make your life a bit easier. The first thing to talk about is the mode that some people appear to not know exists. So when we first go to the AP button, which we've brought up here, if we just hit on off, you get a mode that is indicated by this AP autopilot. Now, various different documentation calls this different things: heading hold, basic pilot relief. I'm probably going to talk about it as heading hold a lot of the time, as opposed to heading select, which is a different mode, or just the AP mode. I'll try and use the AP verbiage for clarity. So what does this do? Well, this does what the heading hold name implies. If your wings level, it holds a heading and it holds the pitch attitude when the mode is engaged. You have command stick steering in pitch. You also have command stick steering in roll, and for roll angles greater than 5 degrees it holds bank angle, just like attitude hold. But if you bring the bank angle down to less than 5 degrees, it will capture that heading, and it should hold the heading. Now, DCS mechanizes this a bit strangely, in that if you have a crosswind, it sort of crabs, so it doesn't appear to hold either ground, sort of ground course over ground, or heading. I think it routes to a sort of a point. If you leave it engaged for a long time with a crosswind, you'll see it develop some quite big turning effects, I think, because it's trying to go to a sort of point on the ground or point on the edge of the map, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, so heading hold in low angles of bank, and then outside of the 5 degrees you get bank angle hold, roll control. You've got command stick steering. Now, this is very similar to the attitude hold mode. If we colonize attitude hold, you can see we've changed to attitude hold, and this does the same thing in pitch. We've got command stick steering, pitch angle capture, and roll control with command stick steering, and it just captures the bank angle. But the difference is that that 5 degree window in the middle where it'll capture a heading doesn't exist. So it just holds exact bank angle all the way down to wings level. This is really useful for formation flying. If you're on long route sections, you can quite comfortably fly the jet in you know, a route spacing echelon or flying wing or something like that, using this mode, just to put tiny little bits of bank angle correction on and pitch correction on. We're going to skip the heading select mode for a minute, and we're going to talk about the other two modes that people use a lot, which is barometric and radar altitude hold. And these modes function exactly the same, only their data source is obviously the barometric altitude or the radar altitude. So but as far as mechanization goes, they're basically identical. So if we decolonize attitude hold, we're back to AP. If we paddle switch, we've completely removed the autopilot. We can go directly into Baro Alt here. And what Baro Alt will show you on the advisories is B Alt. And what that's done is obviously captured a barometric altitude. So you haven't got command stick steering in pitch anymore, because this is taken over the pitch control. But you have got command stick steering in roll. Now, what that roll is doing depends on what mode was engaged before. So if nothing was engaged before, like we just had, then what you've actually got is Baro Alt combined with that heading hold, that AP, basic autopilot mode. So we've got capture of bank angle outside 5 degrees, less than 5 degrees, we've got heading hold. you can combine barometric altitude with attitude hold, and you can colonize these in either order, right? So we've gone B out, attitude hold there. And what that's doing is it's giving you the attitude hold logic in roll instead of the AP logic in roll. So now we don't have heading hold, we have bank angle hold, roll control hold, all the way down to 0 bank. And we, like I say, we can do these in either order. So we've decolonized everything, we've gone back to AP. If we swap the AP to attitude hold and then baro out, we can see we've put those on in the opposite order, but we've got the same behavior. So command stick steering in pitch will override baro out. That's not available with B out selected. It doesn't appear to want to there we go, recapture. No, try again. There we go. So that's barometric altitude hold, and then attitude hold is controlling a roll. If we decolonize attitude hold, it'll disappear. The AP doesn't reappear, that's implied. So if you're in an altitude hold mode, baro or rad alt, without another mode selected, the implied mode that is controlling your roll is that AP mode. So that's command stick steering in roll, bank angle capture for bank angles greater than 5 degrees, and heading hold for bank angles less than 5 degrees. So you can combine those in any way you want, and those really are the most sort of commonly used basic autopilot modes. So it comes down to, how do I want my pitch controlled? That's either an altitude hold or an attitude hold. And then how do I want a roll controlled? Do I want that heading capture effect at less than 5 degrees of roll or not? So you can choose, if you want that heading capture, you want AP. If you don't, you want attitude. And then if you want altitude to be held, you want an altitude hold mode. And if you don't, you don't. So this enables you to do loads of useful stuff that may not be entirely obvious. So certainly in attitude hold, we can do useful things with command stick steering. We can fly and pull the throttles back. We can fly descents, turns, climbing turns, descending turns that are, actually reasonably interesting with the autopilot engaged. It'll stay engaged up to 70 degrees of bank. So we keep banking this will stay engaged. You'll see it toggle off eventually. If we keep banking, it'll go outside the limits eventually. But they're quite far away, the limits. But there we go. It's deselected. So yeah, we can just bring on the basic AP mode, and in this configuration, it'll do the same thing, obviously. So command stick steering and the AP and attitude hold modes can be really quite useful. So you can do quite a lot of stuff. And the same thing in the altitude hold modes. You can put 60 degrees of bank on, and this will quite happily fly a 60 degrees of bank turn level. It probably won't do this with an asymmetric configuration. It doesn't particularly like asymmetric loads. So one of the things you will find is that if you have significantly asymmetric loads, double ugly configuration, then the autopilot doesn't really cope with it fantastically well sometimes. But so with symmetrically loaded jet, the autopilot will sit in 2G orbit, 10 alpha, 60 something degrees angle bank, and auto throttle's engaged, and we're just in this pretty tight orbit. So you can do some reasonably interesting stuff. The other modes that we've got are obviously heading select and coupled. Now, for coupled to show up, we need to actually bring a steering source in, either TACAN or waypoint. And heading select and coupled are ways of taking over the roll control of the aircraft. So obviously, if you've got rad alt or barometric altitude hold selected, that removes your ability to do command stick steering in pitch. If you've got heading select or coupled, that essentially removes, with a small exception in heading select, that essentially removes your ability to do command stick steering in roll. So depending on how you combine these, you may or may not have axes of command stick steering remaining available. So if we put heading select in, obviously that's going to capture a heading that we want. So let's just, if we go direct into heading select, you can see it's popped up head cell. It's going to turn us to the heading button. again, because there's no altitude hold mode indicated, the implied altitude hold mode or pitch control is that mode that you have in attitude or AP, which is command stick steering in pitch, and this captures a pitch angle. So this again enables you to fly climbing turns, descending turns, just mechanized differently in that it's going to turn to and capture a heading. Now, heading select uses 30 degrees angle of bank, and that should not, I think, be airspeed sensitive. So if we let's just stage burners for a second, we'll punch up to say 300 knots. We're going to roll this heading bug round to the right, and then we're going to go AP, heading select. You're going to see that that's just going to capture 30 degrees angle of bank. And now that's different to the coupled mode. So in coupled mode, if we bring the waypoint through to one that's over there, with the waypoint just selected like this and auto unboxed, when we hit coupled mode, it's going to turn and just fly straight to that waypoint. So let's hit coupled, and you can see that it's cranked in quite a lot of bank angle, and that's because we're in TAC blim. Bank limit is set to tactical, and that's airspeed dependent. So at higher airspeeds, it will use a bigger bank angle. If we change that to nav, it'll cap itself to 30 degrees, just like heading select. The heading select does not respect that setting. It caps to 30 degrees all the time. If we go back to TAC blim and we pull the throttles back and we pop the speed brakes out, what you'll see is that bank angle will gradually reduce in an airspeed dependent fashion until it gets to 30 degrees. And it gets to 30 degrees a little under 300 indicated. There we go. And what it's going to do then is just going to capture 30 degrees. And at that point, it's below about 290 knots. TAC and nav blim are the same. So stick it in nav. So, so in coupled mode with nothing else colonized, we're now in pitch hold mode. We've got command stick steering in pitch, and the aircraft's gonna fly to the waypoint in roll. If I try and put any roll control in, you can see it immediately decouples. We get coupled flashing everywhere, coupled waypoint indicating that it was tracking to a waypoint that's now deselected. That is different to heading select. So in heading select, let's just bring this up, 180, go, AP, HCL. It's going to take us round to 180. Stick the 300 knots in the auto throttle. We have command stick steering in roll available. It's not super useful, but we do have it, and it doesn't decouple heading select. So once we're rolled out on 180, the aircraft's going to capture that heading. Again, we've still got command stick steering in pitch because we haven't got anything else selected, but we do have command stick steering in roll in heading select, and it won't decouple heading select. If you do this in coupled mode, it'll decouple. But what happens is that, so if we put some lateral stick in, we've got command stick steering until the stick returns to absolutely the middle, and then suddenly heading select will take over. Not super useful, but you can use it just to set an offset. So if you're on a heading and you just want to sort of offset the jet laterally, say you're on a heading and you want to space out from echelon to line, you could fly that spacing maneuver in with command stick steering, leave the heading set, and then let the jet come back to that heading that you were on before. So there are potentially some uses for this. Now, both of those modes, heading select and coupled, they obviously only control roll. So if you don't colonize anything else, the implied pitch control mode, just like if you colonize purely a pitch control mode, the implied roll control is that behavior from AP, in other words, heading hold at less than 5 degrees or roll hold greater than that. If you colonize just a roll control mode, the implied pitch control behavior is from AP, and what that does is it means that you capture and hold a pitch angle. Now, you can also try and combine these with attitude hold, but it doesn't work. They are alternate, and that's essentially because attitude hold and AP behave the same in pitch. There's no reason you would want to combine these. However, when we're talking about combinations, we can combine, obviously, heading select with another pitch control mode, Baro or Rad Alt, and that has now removed our command stick steering. Apart from, like I said, that strange roll behavior, that has removed our command stick steering in both axes. If we try and pitch in command stick steering, it will decolonize barometric altitude hold. If we select coupled, we can't go there directly. Actually, coupled's one of the strange ones where you have to deselect the other mode first. There we go. So deselected heading, went to coupled, and I'm not sure that behavior is correct, by the way, but there we go. This has now removed command stick steering in both axes. So if I try and roll, immediately coupled will disengage. If I try and pitch, immediately Baro Alt will disengage. Okay, so if you've got coupled with an altitude hold mode, you have no command stick steering available. It's the only combination that you can set where any stick input will immediately start disengaging autopilot modes. But bear in mind, what happens is only the mode that you override disengages, right? So if I roll out of coupled, Baro Alt is still engaged, and Baro Alt implies AP in pitch control, in roll control, if nothing else is shown. So that other mode is still engaged in roll, even though it isn't displayed and even though I never selected it. So if I now roll out to less than 5 degrees, I will get the AP behavior. There you go, it's captured a heading. If I go to coupled here and move to attitude, I can combine attitude hold with Baro Alt. And if I colonize coupled and deselect attitude, I can go between those two like that. I can deselect that. This is B Alt with AP. That's B Alt with attitude. That's B Alt with AP. And that's B Alt with coupled. So you can move between the roll control modes, and the pitch control mode will stay engaged. Similarly, we could be in coupled and be in a level turn and decide we want to fly a descending turn, at which point we could decolonize Baro Alt and pitch down, or we could just command stick steering forward, override, and then put on a descent angle, and we've now got coupled with AP implied, and now we're capturing a pitch angle, right? So the upshot of all of that is that you can override these modes independently of each other and keep other bits functioning. And this is really, really useful, particularly on your instrument approaches, because it's very easy to set, something like this, and then when you get where you want to start your descent, you just put in a descent angle and it starts happening, and other parts of the autopilot remain engaged. Now, we're 2 miles from waypoint 6, and what we're going to see now is some behavior that's current in the Hornet that's actually wrong, and this is what happens when we get to a waypoint in coupled mode. So we're in a single waypoint coupled mode without a course steering line, so you can see coupled waypoint. We arrive at the waypoint, and what we're going to see is this, and this shouldn't happen. So what's supposed to happen, if you read the NATOPS, is that the jet just carries on in a straight line through the waypoint. I'm hoping that's going to get changed at some point. But what happens at the moment is we start to orbit that waypoint, and you can see as we get further from it, the jet's getting more and more kind of steering commands, and it's trying harder and harder to turn back. And it'll because we've got the nav blim engaged, it's going to capture 30 degrees angular bank, and then it's going to sit there, and it's never going to get back to that waypoint with 30 degrees angular bank. Now, this is in a way annoying, but also potentially quite useful, because it means you can just go to a waypoint and then orbit there. Until they probably fix it to be how it's supposed to. Anyway, so that's one thing. Now, the other thing, we're just going to override that coupled mode and roll out on a heading here, and also we're going to override pitch. And you can see what I just did there was overrode both modes with command stick steering, and what's happened is the autopilot's fallen back to AP. And because both modes have disengaged, both those advisories have disappeared. And then the AP advisories appeared because it's not implied anymore by the presence of another advisory, right? So we're just going to climb out here. Just something worth noting while we're climbing out that some people seem not to be aware of. The auto throttle holds a true airspeed, not a calibrated airspeed, so, and that's correct by design because it's trying to hold essentially a speed over the ground. You know, true airspeed, ground speed, no wind condition, they're the same, right? So, so what's going to happen here is as we climb out, our calibrated airspeed is going to go down, even though the auto throttle's engaged, but we should be holding 363 knots trip. Right, so we've talked about those modes. There's a little bit of behaviour with coupled mode that we need to talk about with the course steering lines. So, so what we're going to do, we're going to switch to TACAN now. We're going to use a TACAN station at Guam, at Anderson, and we're going to put a course steering line on. Obviously, if we didn't have course steering, then the autopilot would use a TACAN exactly the same as it would use a waypoint. It would just go directly there. And this behaviour also is the same with course steering line through a waypoint or TACAN. The autopilot doesn't distinguish between the two. Right. So we've set a course steering line. We're going to do now is let's just spin this round actually to 240, and we're going to hit AP coupled, right? And what we're going to see the jet try and do is turn to capture that line, and it's going to struggle because we were pretty close to it. Let's give it an easier line to send a line over here. What I'm just going to do is override that, and you can see override command stick steering. It's fallen back to AP. Let's set the barometric altitude hold on. Let's just get the jet turning. We come all the way around here. We're just going to hit coupled, and we're going to go back to that nav bank limit, and the jet's going to capture this radial heading in towards the waypoint, the TACAN station, or the waypoint. And obviously when it gets to the course line, it's going to turn in, use some logic, try and intercept that line. The logic it uses isn't fantastic, so it often overshoots a little bit, kind of does a few oscillations through the course line, going beyond it and back, etc. But it gets there eventually. Like we said, we can move between these modes without decoupling, you know, like Barrow out hold isn't going to decouple. So one thing we can do is when we capture this course line, if we want to use coupled to do something else, then we can just go into heading hold by decolonizing couple, or we can go into heading select. You know, it's quite easy to roll out, set a heading bug, read this. So inbound to TACAN 265, enter, AP, head cell, it's going to go 265, and now we can manually jog onto the course line if we want to be a bit more precise on the capture, or we want to use coupled for something else, like, for example, want to change the steering cue. So when we've got coupled engaged, we can't change the steering cue, right? Nor can we box auto. We can change the active waypoint, and that's true even if the autopilot's in waypoint mode. You can see decolonized coupled, got the heading hold behavior back, it's just gone to 0 bank. I can now change to waypoint, and if I hit coupled now, it's going to take us to waypoint 6 over there. Right, let's do that. If we go back to TACAN steering, we're going to grab that course line up again, and now what we're going to do is set a course line the other way round. 060, is that going to be close enough? No, let's just roll out here. No, let's keep the turn coming actually. Let's set our course line round. Right, so if I set this course line and we go into coupled, what we're going to see is that the aircraft's going to turn, push the power up a little bit. The aircraft's going to turn and try and capture a course line. It's TACAN. And you can see it's going to be pretty tricky for this. It's going to try and turn back on to capture that inbound course line. However, one thing that maybe is obvious, but maybe isn't, is that you get different behaviour depending on what direction that course line's pointing in. So if we set exactly the opposite course line, what do we have? 1, 2, 5, something like that set. Let's set 300 going that way, and now we're going to select coupled. The jet's going to turn right because it's going to try and capture this course line outbound, heading obviously to the arrowhead. And that's useful because it enables you to fly through waypoints, and that behavior that we had before, where you go to the waypoint or the TACAN station, you start to orbit, that behaves differently if you have the course line set. So we're going to toggle the autopilot off and just drag the jet round inbound to that TACAN station. Let's just set a course line while we're doing that. 090, going to be about there. Yeah, that'll close enough where we're at. Let's capture that. A bit more. Okay, so we're set up roughly inbound. So let's go AP, TACAN on, coupled, BL, and we'll jog in on this course line for 8 miles. So what's going to happen in this mode when we get to the TACAN station is obviously it's just going to keep following the course line heading out. Now, if we don't do anything to the course line, it's going to just carry on in a straight line, essentially. However, again, this gives us one of those ways of doing some quite nice stuff in our instrument plate. So if we know, for example, that we're going to a fix, and then after the fix, the heading we need to go out on is, 030, for example, then we can use coupled mode to capture an inbound radial. Let's bring it back to 250 knots. We can use it to capture an inbound radial, and what we can do is, before we get to the waypoint, if we just deselect coupled mode, we're just going to get heading hold behavior. It's going to carry on, trucking in on that heading. We can now run our course line round to the outbound course line. And there's the TACAN station, disappeared, and hit coupled. Now we could have led that turn if we wanted to. We've sort of treated it as an overfly, and we've gone directly over it, but there we go. And now the jet's just going to capture outbound. So with a few clicks, we can fly the turn. It's going to give us an instrument turn, 30 degrees angle of bank. We've got the auto throttle engaged. You can see TACAN coupled displayed, and it's going to capture that outbound radial and take us where we want to go. And obviously you combine that with heading select as well. The other technique, if you want to do a lead turn, is set the heading select bug halfway between your courses. You could have an inbound course, a sort of intermediate cut corner, and then your outbound radial set, and you can just step through those modes. So coupled, go to heading select, it'll start the turn for you, change the radial, go back to coupled, it'll finish the turn. So you can lead turn. You could lead turn manually by overriding the command stick steering, etc., etc. So this is useful. And so actually, there's lots of times where you can get somewhere, have a pre-set up turn and descent sort of ready in the autopilot, and just, let the autopilot start doing things for you. So if we turn the jet back inbound to that TACAN station, altitude coupled. So we're going to run into this TACAN station. And for example, if we know that our outbound course afterwards is, we'll turn to the right this time, 250, we can get heading into the TACAN, deselect this, set the course line 250, and then when we get to where we want to lead turn, so at 300 knots true, so let's lead turn at 3 miles, heading into TACAN station, and we know we want to fly a descending right-hand turn, for example. There we go, 3 miles, AP, coupled, command stick steering, BL's gone, 5 degrees nose down, and we're going to let the jet fly this descending turn on the auto throttle. It's got the TAC bank limit on, so it's being quite spicy. Now its roll rates don't appear to be affected by that bank limit, so it is quite aggressive sometimes with these. You can see it sort of pitching to make the roll corrections, but it will capture that TACAN line. It's not going to go miles from it. Our offset here is 0.5, it's going to get 0.6, maybe 0.7, but it's not going to get miles from that course line. And then it's going to capture it. And it's going to continue flying this 5-degree descent the whole time. Obviously we can't dial in a rate of descent, so we will to some degree. As we descend, we're going to change calibrated airspeed, the angle of attack is going to change, our descent rate's going to change. But as long as we keep a little bit of an eye on that, we can keep just using little bits of command stick steering to override that, and we're going to let the jet capture that course line and just monitor it. So in terms of reducing pilot workload, this is really, really useful. And again, we could combine this with heading select. We could set our next heading. If we know that 10 miles out from this TACAN, we're going to turn left to 180 and continue the descent down to 8,000. We can leave that on. Again, 300 knots true, 3 mile lead turn, let's say. So there we go, 7 miles, AP. We're going to go to head cell, it's going to turn to that new heading. And then, if we were being really smart, we know we want to level off at 8,000. So we're going to set, let's set 9.5. Going to set an altitude alert for our level off altitude. So now we know the jet's turning onto a heading, it's descending, and when we hear the altitude alert go, then we know it's time to start leveling off. So there we go. He says, altitude. No. Altitude. Obviously doesn't use DCS altitude, not the altitude in the altimeter. Good to know. And we can start leveling off. Jet's still on auto throttle. Heading select still selected. So that is a completely hands-off and very, very easy way to fly some of your instrument plates. You've got lots of tools that you can combine there with heading select modes, course steering modes, coupled mode, and the ability to command stick steering over the top of all of those modes to actually get the aircraft doing what you want, hands-off, relatively unstressfully, without having to use any significant pilot workload. So hopefully that's a bit of a deeper look into how some of these autopilot modes work and some of the kind of stuff you can do to combine them. given how that works, you should be able to fly all your instrument approaches, your port holding at the boat, your marshal at the boat, significant amount of your route sections, even the CAS orbits. If you're holding in a CAS stack, you can do that with the autopilot on. So there's lots and lots of times when potentially you're a bit task loaded, you're trying to work out, your commence times for the marshal, or to write down 9 lines, or do other stuff, look at an approach plate for an unfamiliar field, and you can be doing it with the autopilot on and making your life a lot easier. So hopefully that's useful.